The air in the private dining room was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the heavy silence of men who ruled with iron fists. At the center sat Giovanni Rossi, the once feared lion of the Syndicate, now relegated to the shadows of his own table because his eyes no longer worked. His son, Alessandro, spoke over him as if he were furniture. Jada adjusted her apron, her heart thumping against her ribs. She was just the help, the shy girl who never spoke, but as she leaned in to refill Giovanni's water, she saw the winner ticket tucked into the sleeve of the man sitting to Giovanni's right. It wasn't a gift. It was a tracking device meant to mark the old man for a hit. Maya leaned down, her lips inches from Giovanni's ear, and whispered the two words that would ignite a war. "They're lying." The crystal chandeliers of the Rossi estate cast dancing shadows over the marble floors of Chicago's most exclusive inner circle. But for Jada, the luxury is merely a backdrop for her survival. For months, she has perfected the art of invisibility, serving men like Alessandro Rossi, a man whose cold leadership sounds like a warning to anyone who dares to cross him. Maya is a ghost with a rehearsed smile, hiding her desperate need for financial stability behind a mask of extreme shyness. Tonight, however, her carefully constructed facade is about to crack. While the powerful men at the table ignore the blind patriarch, Giovanni, Maya notices a lethal betrayal hiding in plain sight. A winner ticket marking the old man for a hit. She thinks it's a simple act of warning, but in this world, nothing is ever simple. Alessandro's ruthless right-hand man isn't just watching the old man, he's been watching Maya, noticing every subtle glance she shares with the vulnerable father. As a deadly coup brews within the Rossi empire, Maya must decide if she can find her voice to save the man everyone ignores, or if the shadows she's been hiding in will finally bury her. The golden light of the crystal chandeliers at the Rossi estate felt less like luxury and more like a spotlight Jada had spent months learning to avoid. As she smoothed the front of her black vest, she took a steadying breath, retreating into the practiced anonymity that was her greatest shield. In this room, filled with men whose whispers moved markets and ended lives, being a young black woman in a service uniform made her effectively part of the architecture, as significant as the heavy velvet drapes or the marble pillars. Her shift began with the rhythmic precision she had perfected. Refill the crystal carafes, clear the silk napkins, and above all, keep the eyes down. Maya moved through the dining hall like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the polished floors. She was here to fund a linguistics degree, a ticket out of a world that viewed her as a footnote. But for now, she was the silent observer of a dangerous dynasty. Her focus always drifted to the head table, where the Rossi family dynamic played out in a silent, tragic loop. Alessandro Rossi sat at the center, a man of sharp angles and colder eyes, radiating a terrifying stillness. To his right sat his father, Giovanni. Once the sun around which this entire underworld orbited, the elder Rossi was now a ghost in his own home. His dark glasses were a permanent barrier, marking the boundary of his blindness, and the way the younger men at the table spoke across him, as if he were already gone, stung Maya with a familiar, sharp empathy. She noticed the small things the others ignored. She saw how Giovanni's fingers would occasionally trace the edge of his plate, searching for a landmark he was too proud to ask for. She noticed the way Alessandro's right-hand man, a watcher with tattoos snaking up his neck, tracked every minor movement with a predatory hunger that had nothing to do with loyalty. While Alessandro held court, discussing territory and investments, Maya watched the watcher. She saw him slide a small yellow slip of paper, a winner ticket, toward the blind man's place setting with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. To everyone else, Maya was just the girl with the water pitcher. They didn't see the way her jaw tightened as she registered the malice in that simple gesture. She was a student of languages, and she knew that every movement in this room was a sentence. The ignored father was the subject, the looming enforcer was the verb, and the ticket was the period at the end of a very dark story. As she approached the table to refill Giovanni's glass, the weight of her invisibility felt heavier than ever. She was the only one truly seeing the trap, and the silence of the room was beginning to feel like a scream. Giovanni Rossi sat at the head of the table, yet he had never felt more like a ghost in his own house. The heavy velvet curtains of the private dining room were drawn tight, though for Giovanni, the world had been draped in permanent silk for years. He could smell the expensive Bow wine and the sharp metallic tang of the city's finest silverware, but the warmth of human presence was missing. Across from him, his son Alessandro spoke in a voice that was as cold and precise as a surgical blade, discussing logistics and territories as if his father were merely another piece of the room's ornate decor. To Alessandro, the man who had built this empire was now nothing more than a liability, a lion in winter whose teeth had been pulled by the cruelty of age and infirmity. The isolation was a physical weight. Giovanni could hear the rhythmic clinking of Alessandro's fork against his plate, a steady, dismissive sound that underscored the silence where their relationship used to be. Every time Giovanni attempted to offer a word of counsel, Alessandro would cut him off with a polite but chilling impatience, shifting the conversation back to the younger men in sharp suits who smelled of ambition and gunpowder. Giovanni's hands, once steady enough to command the respect of every syndicate in Chicago, now traced the edges of his wineglass with a slight tremor. He was a prisoner of his own legacy, trapped in a dark world where his only company was the memories of the power he once wielded. Alessandro's leadership was a departure from the old ways. It lacked the fire of Giovanni's era, replaced by a calculated, predatory stillness. He didn't just rule, he monitored everyone with a gaze that felt like a challenge. Maya, standing in the shadows of the sideboard, watched the tragedy unfold. She saw the way Alessandro looked through his father, and the way the elderly man's shoulders slumped under the weight of being ignored by his own blood. In this room filled with Chicago's elite, the most powerful man's father was the most invisible person present, until Maya, clutching her notepad like a shield, prepared to cross the invisible line Alessandro had drawn around his father's chair. The golden glow of the chandeliers felt oppressive as Maya moved through the dining room, her footsteps swallowed by the plush carpet. To any observer, she was merely a blur of black and white fabric, a shadow performing the silent dance of service. But Maya's eyes, sharpened by years of hiding in plain sight, were focused on table 9. Alessandro Rossi was deep in conversation with a man whose presence felt like a cold draft in the room. Marco, his primary enforcer, and the man Maya had come to fear most. Giovanni sat between them, his dark glasses reflecting the flickering candlelight like twin voids. He was humming a low, gravelly tune, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the tablecloth, completely isolated in his world of darkness. Alessandro ignored him, leaning away to check his watch, his attention captured by a phone call that pulled him momentarily into another world. It was in that split second of Alessandro's distraction that the atmosphere shifted. Maya, pretending to adjust a floral arrangement at a nearby station, caught the movement in the reflection of a silver serving tray. Marco didn't reach for his wine or his silk napkin. Instead, his hand moved with the predatory grace of a viper, sliding a small, bright yellow slip of paper from his inner jacket pocket. With a calculated flick of his wrist, he tucked the yellow ticket into the fold of Giovanni's sleeve. Maya's breath hitched. From her vantage point, she could clearly see the bold black letters, "You're a winner." To the blind man, it would feel like nothing more than a stray piece of paper, perhaps a complimentary voucher from the restaurant he had visited 1,000 times. But as Marco withdrew his hand, his eyes didn't stay on the ticket. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room with a sharp, clinical intensity that made Maya's skin crawl. His eyes landed on her for a fraction of a second. Maya immediately dropped her gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She busied herself with the flowers, her hands trembling so violently she feared she might snap a stem. She had seen it, the marker. In the underworld she had tried so hard to escape, a gift like that was never an act of luck. It was a tracking beacon, a visual target that screamed for the attention of a sniper or a kidnapper. The enforcer leaned back, a thin, satisfied smile playing on his lips as he watched the blind man continue to hum, oblivious to the death warrant resting against his skin. Maya felt the weight of her invisibility complex fracturing. She wanted to run, to finish her shift and disappear into the safety of her textbooks, but the image of Giovanni's trusting, sightless face haunted her. The giants were playing their games, and for the first time, the ghost of the restaurant realized she was the only one holding the truth. Maya leaned over the table, her movements fluid and practiced, though her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against the bars of her ribs. The heavy scent of expensive scotch and thick cigar smoke clung to the air, a suffocating reminder of the world these men occupied. Alessandro Rossi sat at the head of the table, his silhouette sharp and cold, barely glancing at the blind man beside him who had once been the most feared name in the city. To the others, Giovanni Rossi was a relic, a lion whose claws had been pulled, but Maya saw the way his fingers drummed a rhythmic, anxious pattern against the fine linen tablecloth. Her eyes darted to the man sitting to Giovanni's right, Alessandro's trusted lieutenant. He wore a mask of perfect loyalty, yet the winner ticket tucked into his cuff caught the light, a silent beacon of the betrayal she had witnessed in the shadows of the kitchen. The stakes were no longer just about her invisibility or her scholarship. They were about the life of a man who was being marked for death by the people he called family. She reached for the water carafe, her hand trembling so slightly she hoped only a blind man could feel the vibration in the air. As she tilted the glass, she felt the piercing gaze of the watcher behind her, Alessandro's enforcer, whose neck tattoos seemed to crawl under the dim restaurant lights. He was the predator in the room, and she was the prey that had seen too much. Maya took a shallow breath, the invisibility she had cultivated for months suddenly feeling like a heavy, restrictive shroud. If she stayed silent, the trap would close, and the Rossi legacy would end in a spray of red on these marble floors. She leaned in, her body shielding the movement from the watcher's line of sight. Her apron brushed against Giovanni's shoulder, a brief, intentional contact that made the old man's drumming fingers freeze in midair. The room was a roar of high-stakes conversation and the clinking of silverware, but for Maya, the world narrowed down to the space between her lips and the old man's ear. She didn't have time for a full explanation or a plea for trust. She only had a single moment of overlap before the enforcer moved closer. Her voice was a ghost of a sound, a tremor of truth in a room built on lies. "They're lying," she whispered, the two words cutting through the atmospheric noise like a blade. Giovanni's head didn't turn, but his jaw tightened, the muscles corded and ancient. In that split second, the power dynamic of the table shifted invisibly. Maya pulled back immediately, her face returning to its rehearsed, expressionless mask as she moved to the next guest. Behind her, the enforcer stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the blind man's face for any sign of a change, but Maya kept walking, her pulse thundering. She had broken the first rule of her survival. She had been seen. Giovanni sat in a heavy silence that Maya could feel even before she reached the table. The winner ticket lay between them like a live wire, its bright yellow edges mocking the darkness of his world. Maya's hands shook as she adjusted the silver on the table, the two words she had whispered still hanging in the air like a terminal diagnosis. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant clatter of the kitchen and the low, predatory hum of the restaurant's elite. Giovanni's hand, weathered and steady despite his years, reached out across the linen. He didn't grope blindly. He moved with the practiced grace of a man who had once commanded rooms with a look. His fingers brushed the ticket Maya had identified as a marker, then moved with sudden, surprising speed to catch her wrist. His grip wasn't aggressive, but it was absolute. Maya didn't pull away. In that contact, she felt the weight of a secret alliance forming, a bridge between the powerful lion in winter and the girl who had spent her life trying to be a ghost. They think because I cannot see the blade, I cannot feel the wind of its swing, Giovanni murmured, his voice a low vibration that barely carried past their immediate space. He tilted his head toward the upper right where his son's enforcer stood watching. They treat me like a relic, a piece of the architecture to be dusted and eventually discarded. He turned his sightless gaze directly toward Maya, and for a second she felt truly seen for the first time in her life. But you see the things they are too arrogant to hide. You saw the lie. Maya leaned in, her voice a thread of sound intended only for his ears. It's not just the ticket, Mr. Rossi. It's the way they look at you when you aren't looking back. It's the medicine. It's the whispers in the hall. Giovanni's grip tightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the danger they were both now tethered to. Alessandro is blinded by his own ambition, but I am merely blind. There is a difference. He leaned closer, the scent of expensive tobacco and old cedar clinging to him. I cannot trust my blood, and I certainly cannot trust my shadow. I need eyes, Maya, eyes that know how to remain invisible while the world burns. Maya looked at the menacing figure looming in the background, then back at the vulnerable, sharp-minded man before her. The invisibility she had cultivated to protect herself was now the very tool he needed to survive. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Tell me everything," Giovanni replied, his voice hardening into the tone of the boss he had once been. "Be my eyes in the dark, and I will be the shield you never had. We will see the truth together." The tension in the Rossi estate was a silent, creeping frost, and Maya could feel it nipping at her heels every time she crossed the dining room floor. To the rest of the world, she was still the invisible waitress, a blur of black and white fabric moving between tables. But to one man, she had become a flashing red light. Marco, Alessandro's chief enforcer and the watcher in the shadows, had stopped looking past her. Now, his cold, calculating gaze followed the line of her shoulders and the deliberate path of her footsteps. Each time Maya approached Giovanni's table, the air seemed to thicken. She felt Marco's eyes like a physical weight against her spine, tracking the way she lingered just a second too long while refilling a glass, or the way her posture shifted when she stood near the blind patriarch. Giovanni sat with a practiced, stoic stillness, his dark glasses masking the sharp focus Maya knew was hidden beneath. They were allies in a house of mirrors, communicating through the smallest of gestures, a specific way she placed a napkin or a rhythmic tap of his finger on the mahogany table. "You're attentive tonight, Maya." Marco's voice cut through the ambient hum of the room, sharp and dry. He had appeared at the edge of the service station, his large, tattooed frame casting a long shadow over her. He didn't look at the menu in his hand, he looked only at her. The old man usually prefers his solitude. Why the sudden change in service? Maya kept her head down, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She forced her hands to remain steady as she polished a silver tray, leaning into the shy, unassuming persona she had worn like armor for months. He reminds me of my grandfather, sir," she whispered, her voice small and trembling just enough to be convincing. "I just want to make sure he's comfortable. No one else seems to notice when his water is low." Marco stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne and cold iron clinging to him. He leaned down, his eyes searching hers for a crack in the glass. "In this house, noticing things can be a dangerous habit, especially things that don't concern you." He let the threat hang in the air, a silent promise of what happened to those who saw too much. Maya nodded quickly, a rehearsed gesture of submission, and hurried away. But as she retreated toward the kitchen, she caught Giovanni's slight, almost imperceptible nod. He had heard the exchange. The predator was circling, and the clock was ticking. Maya realized then that she could no longer hide in the shadows. She was already standing directly in the light of the watcher's eye, and her only way out was to move faster than the strike. The silence of the Rossi estate's library was thick, smelling of old leather and the faint metallic tang of the specialized equipment Giovanni had once used to keep his empire sharp. Maya's fingers trembled as she sat at the mahogany desk, the sleek, untraceable phone Dante had given her glowing like a beacon in the dim light. She knew she was no longer just a waitress serving drinks to men who treated her like furniture. She was now the only bridge between a blind man's survival and a legacy's collapse. She navigated through the encrypted files Dante's team had intercepted, her linguistics training allowing her to spot patterns others missed. It wasn't just a list of names, it was a blueprint for a massacre. The winner ticket she had seen earlier wasn't a random stroke of luck for a blind man. It was the cornerstone of a massive sweepstakes scam orchestrated by Alessandro's most trusted enforcer. Maya scrolled through the digital paper trail, her breath hitching as she realized the cruelty of the plan. The scam targeted the elderly and vulnerable within the Syndicate's territory, draining their life savings into offshore accounts that bypassed the Rossi family's ledger entirely. The deeper she dug, the more the invisibility she had perfected for 6 months felt like her greatest weapon. She found a series of communications between the enforcer and a group of Russian contacts, detailing how the sweepstakes were used to mark internal targets. The tickets were embedded with trackers, turning a supposed prize into a beacon for an assassin's hit. Giovanni hadn't been ignored because he was weak. He was being ignored so that no one would notice the leash being tightened around his neck. The stakes finally became clear in a high-priority memo she decoded. The final grand prize was set to be announced at the upcoming gala, a signal that would trigger a coordinated coup across the city. If Maya stayed silent, the blind man she had come to respect would be the first to fall, and Alessandro would be left ruling over a graveyard. The shy girl who had once feared being seen now felt a cold, sharp resolve. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was the only one who could see the knife before it struck, and for the first time in her life, the weight of her secret didn't make her want to run, it made her want to fight. The grand ballroom of the Rossi estate was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp tuxedos, a facade of elegance masking the predatory instincts of the men within. Crystal chandeliers cast a deceptive glow over the crowd, but to Maya, the light felt like a spotlight on her back. She moved through the room with a silver tray balanced on one hand, her black vest cinched tight, her heart a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was back to being a ghost, a silent observer in a room full of monsters, but the stakes had changed. Every clinking glass sounded like a countdown, and every whispered conversation felt like a plot in motion. Alessandro stood near the center of the room, the picture of composed power, unaware that the men shaking his hand were the same ones sharpening their knives. Nearby, Giovanni sat in a high-backed velvet chair, his dark glasses reflecting the overhead lights. To the casual observer, he was a tragic figure of a bygone era, but Maya saw the way his head tilted, catching the frequency of voices the others ignored. He was the anchor in the storm, and she was his eyes. She caught the eye of the lead enforcer across the room, the man who had placed the winner ticket on Giovanni's sleeve. He was leaning against a marble pillar, his gaze tracking Alessandro with a cold, hungry intensity. He checked his watch, a subtle signal that sent a chill down Maya's spine. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the oxygen replaced by the metallic tang of impending violence. Maya approached Giovanni's chair, her movements rehearsed and fluid. As she leaned in to offer him a fresh flute of sparkling water, she felt the enforcer's eyes burn into her. She didn't flinch. She had spent a lifetime being small, being the one people looked past, but tonight, that invisibility was her greatest weapon. "The shadows are moving, Mr. Rossi," she whispered, her voice a mere breath against the ambient hum of the string quartet. "Position 4 and 9, they're closing the exits." Giovanni's hand, weathered but steady, reached out and brushed her sleeve. It was a silent acknowledgement, a bond forged in the heat of betrayal. Alessandro was still laughing at a joke made by a man who had already signed his death warrant. The transition from celebration to slaughter was seconds away. Maya looked toward the service corridor, the path she had memorized until it was etched into her soul. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the thin line between a legacy and a bloodbath. As the lights flickered, a prearranged signal for the strike, Maya reached for Giovanni's arm. The time for whispering was over. The shy girl was gone. In her place stood the only person in the room who truly saw the trap. The chaos erupted not with a bang, but with the sudden, jagged sound of a crystal chandelier shattering in the foyer. The high-tension atmosphere of the gala snapped instantly. Maya didn't wait for the screaming to start. She gripped Giovanni's arm, her fingers sinking into the fabric of his expensive gray shirt. "The back way, now," she breathed, her voice no longer the whisper of a shy waitress, but the command of a woman who had spent months memorizing every inch of this labyrinth. Giovanni didn't hesitate. He trusted the only hands that had shown him kindness in a room full of predators. Maya guided him with a firm, rhythmic pace, her mind racing through the restaurant's layout, the service corridors, the narrow linen closets, and the hidden staff exits she'd used 1,000 times to remain invisible. Behind them, the heavy thud of combat boots echoed against the marble, a cold reminder of the Watcher who had traded his loyalty for a coup. "Keep your head low," Maya urged, as she pulled him into the dimly lit kitchen passage. The air here was thick with the scent of industrial cleaner and stale grease, a stark contrast to the expensive cologne and jasmine in the ballroom. She navigated the narrow turns with surgical precision, using a heavy steel prep table to block a swinging door just seconds before their pursuers reached it. She knew the tile floor was slick near the walk-in freezer. She tightened her hold on Giovanni, whispering a warning just as his foot began to slide, keeping him upright through sheer force of will. They were moving through the invisible world she had lived in for 6 months, the world the Rossi Empire's elite usually walked past without a glance. She felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The very thing that had made her a ghost was now the only thing keeping the patriarch of the city's most dangerous family alive. As they reached the heavy iron service door leading to the alley, Maya paused, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could hear the muffled shouts of the enforcers circling back through the dining room. The pressure cooker had finally blown its lid, and the transition from a quiet waitress to a protector was complete. She pressed her back against the cold metal door, peering through the small, reinforced window. "Almost there, Giovanni," she whispered, her voice steadying. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was the eyes of a man who had been left in the dark, and she refused to let the shadows take him. Maya pushed the door open into the cool night air, leading the blind lion out of the cage his own son had helped build. The golden light of the ballroom felt like a cage as Maya led Giovanni through the final set of heavy oak doors. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that contrasted with the cold, calculated silence of the room. At the far end, Alessandro stood alone, his silhouette framed by the city skyline, unaware that his world was seconds away from fracturing. The enforcer, Silvio, stepped out from the shadows, his hand already moving toward the suppressed pistol at his waist. "That's far enough, Maya," he sneered, his voice a low hiss. "You should have stayed invisible. Now you're just another casualty of a changing tide." But Maya didn't flinch. The girl who had spent months hiding in the corners of high-end restaurants was gone, replaced by a woman who had seen the rot at the center of an empire. "The only tide changing tonight, Silvio, is yours," she said, her voice steady and echoing with a newfound authority that made Alessandro turn. Giovanni stepped forward, his hand tightening on Maya's arm for support, but his head was held high, the old lion reclaiming his pride. "My son!" Giovanni called out, his sightless eyes fixed unerringly on Alessandro's position. "You have been led by a viper who whispers of loyalty while sharpening a blade for your back." Silvio laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "He's a blind old man, Alessandro. He's confused. The girl is an outsider, a plant." "Is he confused about the offshore transfers to the Russians?" Maya countered, stepping into the light and holding up the tablet she had secured from the safe house. Or the tracking device you disguised as a winner ticket to mark your own boss's father for a hit. Alessandro's eyes darted between the digital records Maya displayed and the pale, sweating face of his most trusted lieutenant. The silence that followed was suffocating. Maya watched the realization dawn on Alessandro, the weight of his own negligence and the depth of Silvio's greed.
I gave you everything,
Alessandro whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal edge. You gave me a seat at a table that was already crumbling, Silvio spat, realizing the game was up. I just decided to build my own. Before Silvio could draw, Alessandro's hand was faster, the barrel of his weapon leveled at the enforcer's chest. But it was Giovanni who spoke the final word. Silence, the old man commanded, and for the first time in years, the room obeyed him. He turned his face toward Maya, a ghostly smile touching his lips. You see, Alessandro, you ignored the one person who was actually looking. She was the only one who didn't let the shadows blind her. In that moment, the power shifted. Maya wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was the catalyst that had saved a legacy. As security swarmed to remove Silvio, Alessandro looked at Maya not as decor, but as the only person in Chicago he could truly trust. Maya took a deep breath, the invisibility she had once craved finally falling away, replaced by the heavy, necessary light of the truth. They say the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens while everyone else is shouting. Maya Jada proved that kindness isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. She saved a father, a son, and herself by simply refusing to stay invisible. If you believe that the smallest voice can change everything, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us tell stories of the unsung heroes among us. Like, share, and subscribe to join our community and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of justice. Until next time, remember, someone is always watching and someone is always listening.